This video will help you understand when you should or shouldn't use your 529 plan. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. Growing in popularity over the past couple decades is helping clients plan and prepare for expected college expenses. Now, the most popular vehicle to do this is some type of 529 plan, and the whole purpose is to help them pay for school. Now, we'll dive into exactly what that means and how the IRS defines what is or is not an appropriate use of 529 money. We'll also touch on the tax ramifications of what happens if you violate the IRS's rules. So let's jump in. For a quick meta-level understanding as to how 529 plans are structured, you'll either have what are called prepaid tuition plans or college savings plans. Sometimes I'll just refer to those as investment-based 529 plans. Technically, if you're going to do some Googling on the IRS website, the IRS refers to these as qualified tuition plans or QTPs. There are, of course, other ways to save for education through the use of things like Coverdell's or UTMAs and things like that. That's beyond the scope of today's video. Plus, Coverdell's are kind of going the way of the dodo bird. They're not that popular of investment vehicles anymore. Prepaid tuition plans are essentially based on units, and you purchase a present value cost of those units so that you don't have to pay the future value cost of those units whenever your kiddo is eventually going to school. Now, not every state offers a prepaid tuition plan, but for example, in Washington state, we have what's called the GET program, or Guaranteed Education Tuition Plan, where 100 units equals 1 year's worth of tuition at your public universities. As of 2024, units cost $123.76, which if you multiply that times 100, is the exact cost of 1 year's worth of tuition at University of Washington, for example. And so the thought process here is you are buying tuition at today's rates because who knows what the tuition rates will inflate to, 18 years in the future or whenever your kiddo is getting ready to enter into university. College savings plans, on the other hand, also known as investment-based 529 plans, don't have any type of guarantee in them, whereby if your account grows or doesn't grow, that's entirely your fault. Compared to prepaid tuition plans, you are guaranteed that your purchasing power never goes down because you're buying the units, you're not buying a dollar value. With college savings plans, you can theoretically invest in a whole host of different investment options, and every state I'm aware of offers a state-level 529 plan. And while you don't have to pick your state's 529 plan if you want to use, say, the Virginia plan and you live in Washington because maybe you like American funds, and there's tons of different investment custodians to pick from if you have a preferred vendor. However, in order to qualify for your state's state-level income tax deduction on funding a 529 plan, which some states offer, you will need to use your state's native 529 plan. Simply put, this 529 plan is basically like a Roth IRA for education. You put money in post-tax, the money grows and compounds tax-free, and as long as you use it for qualified education expenses, which we'll touch on what that means in a little bit, that money completely comes out tax-free. From a personal bias standpoint, this is the type of 529 plan I have set up for my kids. Now let's talk about how to actually use this money. The IRS will bifurcate your distributions from this 529 plan as either a qualified distribution or a non-qualified distribution. Qualified distributions are distributions that people commonly think of as being used for college. So tuition, room and board, books, supplies, etc. All of those are considered qualified higher education expenses and are considered qualified distributions. If it's a qualified distribution, that money comes out of the account completely tax-free. Some uncommon expenses that are still considered qualified distributions will be things like computers, Wi-Fi, any specialized software you need as a student, maybe like Adobe Pro or whatever. And it could also include off-campus rent. Now, your specific education institution is going to have particular limits on how much qualifies for off-campus rent, and a lot of times is equivalent to whatever they were going to charge you for on-campus rent. In addition to off-campus housing, grocery bills, commonly thought of as not qualified distributions, could actually be considered a qualified distribution as long as it, again, stays within particular thresholds that are set by your university relative to what they otherwise would have charged you for like a meal plan. Now, $1 million question I'm sure is on the mind of a number of students is, can they use their 529 plan to buy beer? Well, I guess technically, if it falls under those grocery expense limitations sent by your school, maybe there's a way you could finagle things. Generally, I wouldn't recommend it because if the IRS ever wants to see receipts, it's not going to look so good if you're buying a bunch of alcohol for your grocery bill that's supposed to be for things like, proteins and fats and healthy carbs. But I guess technically you could use your 529 plan. Generally, though, I wouldn't recommend it. Either way, I doubt my recommendation here is going to stop any younglings from enjoying the high life with their buds, especially since a lot of these college kids have a number of decades before they're past their prime. Okay, so that's enough beer puns for one day. Qualified distributions can also apply to private school tuition for kindergarten through 12th graders. Now, that distribution is limited to $10,000 a year. So if private school tuition is 11 grand, you're only permitted to take 10 grand out, and you'll have to pay out of pocket for the extra 1,000. In addition, it wouldn't be considered a qualified distribution if you pull money out for your K through 12th grader to pay for things like a laptop or school supplies. Those, as of now, are not considered qualified education expenses, even though you pretty much have to have that for you to go to school. Lastly, you can use up to 10 grand from your 5 to 9 plan to repay your student loans, either towards principal or interest, or you can use 10 grand to pay for a sibling's student loans as well. That withdrawal is limited to 10 grand as a lifetime withdrawal. So is it going to make a huge dent if you have 100 grand student loans? Maybe, maybe not, but it'll at least knock 10 grand off if you finish school and you didn't use all your 5 to 9. As far as logistically, how to get money from a 5 to 9 to a particular institution, you've got two methods. You can either have the 5 to 9 plan, send the money directly to that institution, or you can pay out of pocket and have the 5 to 9 plan distribute the money to you as a reimbursement. Personally, I like the cleanliness of sending the money directly to the particular institution. However, I would say 99% of clients pay out of pocket and then ask for a reimbursement from their 5 to 9 plan. And a lot of that is just logistically, it's kind of a pain in the butt to send money to third-party institutions, track that the check arrives, track that they received it, etc. Non-qualified withdrawals, on the other hand, are withdrawals that in whole or in part violate one of the aforementioned IRS rules on qualified distributions. What that means is the distribution pulled out for a non-qualified distribution is probably going to come with some level of income taxes and a 10% withdrawal penalty tax. Now that part's a little bit nuanced, and so we'll touch on that in a quick minute. Now, if tuition this year was 25 grand and you pulled out 20,000 bucks as a reimbursement, the majority of that withdrawal is still considered a qualified distribution. But in this example, 5,000 of that would be considered a non-qualified distribution. Now that doesn't mean $5,000 is now subject necessarily to income taxes and a 10% penalty tax. What it does mean, however, is you're going to have to do a little bit of a calculation to figure out how much of that $5,000 is going to be considered income taxable and 10% penalty taxable. According to the IRS, given that your 5 to 9 plan is encompassed of basis or your contributions and gain or earnings, your basis always gets returned to you tax-free, whether through a qualified or a non-qualified distribution. But 5 to 9 withdrawals come out proportionally between earnings and basis. So simply put, if your $200,000 5 to 9 account is 50% basis, aka you've put in 100 grand, and 50% earnings, aka another 100 grand, if you were to liquidate the entire account, 50% would be for sure tax-free. And if the other 50% was entirely a non-qualified distribution, that 50% you will pay income taxes and a 10% penalty tax on. If you're one of the unlucky few that also live in a state with a state level income tax, you can tack on state income taxes as well. And some states, such as California, even levy a special state level non-qualified 529 distribution penalty tax. For example, I think California charges like 2.5% on top of everything else. So just to keep it clear, your basis or your contributions is always returned to you tax-free, whether through a qualified or a non-qualified distribution. However, the earnings portion of your 5 to 9 plan, if it's a qualified distribution, will be completely tax-free. But a non-qualified distribution is going to subject a portion of that earnings, however much of the withdrawal is proportional to those earnings. That earnings portion would be considered income taxable and 10% penalty taxable. Now, there are some exceptions to the 10% penalty tax, and these would be things like death or disability, but very common and generally encouraged would be the dollar value equivalent of any type of tax-free scholarship. In this example, you're permitted to take that dollar value out of your 5 to 9 plan. The kicker here, though, is since you had earnings in that account, you're still going to pay income taxes on the portion of the withdrawal that's attributable to earnings. You just won't pay 10% in addition in taxes on the distribution that's attributable to those earnings. Only income taxes. Again, though, your contributions, or the portion of the distribution that is attributable to your contributions, that comes out tax-free. You already paid income taxes on that amount. And we don't have time to get into it in today's video, but I will touch on this in a future video. If you accidentally took too much money out of a plan, for example, maybe you got a tuition bill for 25 grand and then the accounting department says actually it's only 20, but you already reimbursed yourself 25,000. There are methods of getting that 5,000 back into a 529 plan. To keep it super simple, you've got like 60 days to move that money into either another 529 plan or back into the current 529 plan. We'll touch on some nuance in a future video. But just know there is a way to get money back in where you aren't going to get hit with non-qualified distribution, penalty taxes, and income taxes. So tax forms to expect whether you take a qualified or a non-qualified distribution from your 529 will be a 1099-Q. And I'll link that below so you can look at an example if you have yet to receive one of these in the past. But ultimately, when I was touching on a portion of your withdrawal will be attributable to earnings and a portion will be attributable to basis, this is where that gets reported. The total amount of money you take out of the plan will be reported in box 1, and then box 2 and 3 will show the portion that's attributable to earnings and basis, respectively. The investment custodian that runs this plan is responsible for sending you that 1099-Q, and they would ideally have it to you by January 31st in the calendar year following when you took the money out. So from a calls to action standpoint, I would say if paying for your kids' education in the future is a high priority for you, I'd absolutely recommend either meeting with your advisor or DIYing some type of education funding strategy. Rarely is it the best strategy to wait and see what happens, but at least now starting to layer in dollar cost averaging or saving towards some type of education goal, I think is a must-have nowadays with the cost of education. Now, whether you choose to use a 529 plan or some other type of investment account, that's totally up to you, and your advisor might be able to provide some good advice there. In my personal opinion, I don't like to see clients overfund their 529s. If anything, I'd rather those 529s be underfunded and we would have more flexibility by using like a taxable investment account or like a joint investment account, for example. If you have friends or family that have their kiddos in a private middle school, high school, elementary school, whatever, first and foremost, refer them to me. But second, also let them know that they can use 529 plans to reimburse themselves for up to 10 grand in tuition. Looking at the private schools in Edmonds, I think roughly 12 grand is kind of the going rate maximum a year for elementary school, private school. So while I could take 10 grand out of each 529 plan and pay for it, I'd have to then pick up the cost for that extra 2 grand a year. However, based on how large the 529 plans are, it could totally make sense for someone to start doing that sooner rather than later. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments below or get in touch on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.